Hi there, I'm Haggai Davis, Club President of the Rotary Club of Baton Rouge. Welcome to our noon meeting. This is the virtual meeting for now. Hopefully we get enough vaccines going, we can get back to being in-person. So that being said, welcome to our meeting again. And I think I told you I'm Haggai Davis, Club President. Our speaker today will be Libbie Sonnier, who will be more formally introduced. We will start off with invocation by Melanie Palmisano.
Let us pray. Oh God, thank you for this time we have together today as a Rotary family. We lift to you our concern for people who are vulnerable to become severely ill from COVID, the elderly and people with chronic health conditions. Please protect them from harm and be their comfort in this time of uncertainty and isolation from loved ones. Thank you for the gift of Rotary. We ask that you help us each day to live in a way that is pleasing to you. Help us to work together in service, always mindful of our pledge to promote goodwill and respect. Amen.
And the pledge will be led by Michael Tipton.
Please join me in the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
And the four-way test by Deborah Todd.
Is it the truth? Is it fair to all concerned? Will it build goodwill and better friendships? Will it be beneficial to all concerned?
So we have no announcements today, so we'll just proceed right on along with the introduction of our speaker. Susan Nelson will do the introduction. Hi, Susan.
Hi, Haggai. Thank you so much. My fellow Rotarians, it is my pleasure to introduce to you today a true treasure of our state, Dr. Libbie Sonnier. She is the Executive Director of the Louisiana Policy Institute for Children, an organization that envisions a Louisiana in which all young children birth through age 4 are safe, healthy, and reach their full potential. Dr. Sonnier brings to our state a nearly 20-year career supporting young children and their families. She has led teams in system-wide initiatives for the betterment of children, family, caregivers, and practitioners. In her first 18 months with the Policy Institute, she helped secure $18 million in new funding for early care and education in the state's budget, and she helped expand access to the state's child care assistance program by 85%. She then secured Louisiana's first 7-figure Pritzker Foundation grant, focusing on a wide range of improvements for every baby in Louisiana from prenatal to preschool. Her extensive academic career is a testament to her dedication to evidence-based best practice. Dr. Sonnier holds a Doctor of Philosophy in Human Development from Virginia Tech, a Master's in Education in Masters of Education in Early Childhood Intervention and Family Support Services from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, and a Bachelor of Science in Special Education from the University of Southern Mississippi. She is also the co-author of multiple publications and technical reports, working with the nationally renowned doctors Sharon and Craig Ramey. She is recognized for her tenacity. She's received numerous awards, including the Hewlett Serving Spirit Fellowship Award for her commitment to individuals with disabilities. She's been recognized as the Rotary Club of Roanoke Valley's Extraordinary Woman Rising Star. She's been selected as a New Orleans City Business Woman of the Year honoree, and most recently, she was a member of the 2020 leadership class. Whew, I told you guys, she is a state treasure. As we celebrate Early Education Week, it is my exceptional honor to introduce my colleague, my friend, and most importantly, a fellow warrior in the fight to improve the lives of Louisiana's children, Dr. Libbie Sonnier.
Thank you, Susan. Well, it's a real pleasure to be with you all today. Rotary is one of my favorite groups to be able to talk to because of your commitment to really improving the world around you. Again, my name is Libbie Sonnier. I'm the Executive Director of the Louisiana Policy Institute for Children, and we just so appreciate being able to take part of this time with you all, particularly as this is Louisiana's 4th annual Early Ed Week. So at the Louisiana Policy Institute for Children, our mission really is about advancing policies to ensure that Louisiana's young children are ready for success in school and in life. And we really envision a Louisiana in which all young children birth to age 4, again, are safe, healthy, and reach their full potential. In our work, it's really to seek to be a source of nonpartisan, independent information on issues concerning children birth through 4 in Louisiana. I believe my slides will be coming up shortly as well. Next, please. Next. Thank you. And so I'm going to spend some time talking with you all today about the first 5 years of life and the business issue related to that. Next. And so really, childcare and early care and education is a Louisiana workforce productivity issue. We know that currently in Louisiana, 67% of children birth to age 4 have both of their single parents in the workforce, and that 61% of infants' mothers go back to work during their first year, and that childcare in Louisiana actually costs almost as public annual tuition in our state. So $7,500 a year for childcare. That's no small feat. And so with these 3 facts that we have laid before us, we at the Louisiana Policy Institute for Children, we're really trying to understand what the cost of families not having access to childcare was costing the state, as well as our industries that have businesses here. Next slide. And so what we did is we decided to do our own research on this issue. And thanks to the Business Roundtable Committee of 100, Entergy that helped fund this report, we were able to work with researchers at LSU and others to figure out what are the gaps in reliable, affordable, quality childcare that affect the efficiency and the output of Louisiana's current workforce. Next slide. And so what you'll see here is that in Louisiana's workforce participation, lack of childcare is an issue. And it's an issue for many things. Parents had to turn down promotions. They were not able to go from a part-time to a full-time job. They had to go from a full-time to a part-time job. Some families even faced being fired because they didn't have access to quality early care and education, or they just had to quit their job. And so you'll see here that over 16% of respondents had to quit their job because of childcare issues, and 7.6% of respondents reported that they were being fired because of lack of childcare. Next slide. And it's also a women's workforce issue, and more so because women's workforce participation really is greatly affected by childcare issues. And so you'll see here the differences between men and women, whereas women had to quit their job almost 15% of the time versus 1.5% of men. And you can see the same things with being fired, going full to part-time, and then remaining part-time, or having to turn down a promotion. Next slide. And so almost half of the parents, both men and women, missed work regularly due to childcare issues within the given time period that we conducted the study. And so you see right here, it's far reaching. It's not just a female or male issue, but this is it's a parent issue, and it's a workforce issue when you have to miss work, be tardy, or leave early. Next slide. And that childcare issues cost employers in the state and Louisiana an estimated $116 million for employers, $1.1 billion annual loss for our economy, and $84 million annual loss in tax revenue. We're working with the Blanco Center at ULL right now to update the Losing Ground report, because now Losing Ground was in 2017 and we wanted to updated numbers. And from preliminary results, these numbers hold true about what it's costing Louisiana by families and employers not having access to quality early care and education. Next slide. And so it's been such a business issue that the U.S. Chamber Foundation created this report called Workforce of Today, Workforce of Tomorrow. In addition to this report, what the U.S. Chamber Foundation also did is, because of the Losing Ground report that the Policy Institute completed, they've replicated the work that we have done here with Losing Ground in several other states around the country, so that people in states and economies can really understand the cost of childcare and the lack of it. Next slide. And so workforce tomorrow, what happens early matters most. So what we know, and from somebody who's a developmental specialist, and little people are my favorite people, what we know is that neuroscientists that 80% of brain development happens between birth and age 3. Not that little people aren't going to continue to learn past age 3 or 4 or up in age, but we know that architecture of the brain really happens in these early years. And brains are built over time, and they're built from the bottom up. It's just like a faulty infrastructure of a house. You don't want to build a house on a cracked cement slab. You don't want to continue to build a brain that's not being able to be nurtured and cared for so that it can reach its optimal level. And what we also know from science is that early experiences affect the quality of the brain architecture over time. They really establish either a sturdy or a fragile foundation, like I just mentioned, and that the brain, again, is like the foundation of a house. And so we want to make sure that we build strong Louisianians, and we do that by investing in early care and education. Next slide. And so this is from some of my own work related to the significant academic and social benefits throughout the life course when children have access to quality early care and education. I've had the great privilege of working on the longest longitudinal study in the country related to early care and education. And what we found out through that study is that when you have quality early care and education in those first 5 years of life, these things happen. You have increased rates of intelligence, you have better reading and math scores, higher academic locus of control, which means you believe that you can do well in school because you have the power to do so. You have higher social competency, greater years in school, college attendance. You even have better metabolic health because of being in robust environments in your first few years. Also, you have decreased rates of grade repetition, special education placement, teen pregnancies, smoking and drugs, teen depression, as well as, you have reduced rates of needing public assistance or being overweight or having a high BMI. The other piece of this that I think is most exciting is we talk about children all the time, but we don't have children unless we have families. And so one of the increased benefits of families being able to get back to work, and what we saw in the longitudinal work on abecedarian, is that the benefits to mothers were great. They had higher educational attainment and better employment. Additionally, from this last round of research that we did, what we also found out is that these mamas were living longer because they had access to childcare so that they could continue to go to school or work and then provide better for their families. Next slide. And so the takeaway from The Economist is this: a return on investment in high quality early care and education is up to 13% from Dr. James Heckman. I will tell you this, I say this all the time. I don't know anywhere I can put my money and get 13% return on investment. And so aren't our children the most important precious commodity that we have, that we would want to invest as much money as we can, because the return on investment on them is so great for them, for their families, for their region, and for our state and for our country. Next slide. And so early care and education in Louisiana. So we do a really fine job about covering our 4-year-olds that are at risk in the state. We're actually over 90% of covering our at-risk 4-year-olds. But the funding has to be protected every year. It's never guaranteed. And the unintentional consequences have been really making it hard and expensive to care for birth to 3-year-olds. Next slide. And so where we do shine is that we have this wonderful package of school readiness tax credits. And this tax credit structure that we have allows us as a state to draw down all federal monies that we possibly can for early care and education, which is fantastic. Until recently, I didn't realize there were a number of states that weren't able to draw down their full federal money because they didn't have the state match money. But this is a place that we as Louisianians, we shine because we have this really innovative school readiness tax credit that people want to copy all over the country. Next slide. The other piece that where we have shined is that we had this Act 3 reform in 2012, which really unified our system related to young children. So we used to have, the LA4 program, we had the governor's program, we had Head Start, Early Head Start, Child Care Assistance, all those things, different agencies. They're all now combined into one agency within the Department of Ed. There's aligned standards across programs. There's one rating system to rate quality amongst all the programs. And so it's really helped us have a robust accountability system for our state. And so much so that we're number 8 in a good way in the country related to our accountability system for early care and education. Next slide. Where we fall short is this. Again, we serve over 90% of our 4-year-olds that are at risk. However, we used to serve around over 40,000 kids at any given time point about a decade ago. And now we serve anywhere between 15 and 18,000 children at a given time point currently. And we have had a wait list for child care assistance, which is the program. It's basically a voucher for families to find child care that are at risk. We've had children up to 3,000 families on a wait list at a time. Right now, the wait list is not there, but with COVID, who really knows what the potential wait list could be? And so childcare in Louisiana costs almost, again, as much of public tuition, but we serve less than 15% of our low-income families of children birth to age 3 that can access any publicly funding programs for childcare. And so it's really important to understand that, because we've got close to 40% of our kindergartners that are already behind when they enter kindergarten. Actually, the new statistic that I just heard this morning was we have 40% of kindergartners entering in to kindergarten ready to learn, which means we have about 60% of kindergartners that are entering into kindergarten that can't access the curriculum because they're not ready to learn at the kindergarten level. Next slide. And so one of the things that we did when we had a long waiting list is the Policy Institute is we did a study that we now term as the Balancing Act, where we talked to families about what are the choices they were having to make because they didn't have access to quality early care and education. Next slide. And so we worked with the Louisiana Department of Education, where we surveyed families on the Child Care Assistance Program back in September of 19. And we surveyed families asking about the impact of not receiving child care assistance and how that affected their parent employment, availability, reliability, and those types of things. And the results from this survey really show significant challenges that are facing families. Again, this was pre-COVID, but we're seeing the similar things post-COVID as well. Next slide. And so key findings is that over 60% of respondents choose childcare because of their affordability, not necessarily about quality. And so what we know is that poor quality is harmful to children. And what we also know is that parents are having to make really hard decisions. And so they're having to make decisions about what they can afford, not necessarily what they would really want to send their children to. Next slide. And that 90% of these families really worry about finding childcare without childcare assistance because they've been on a wait list before, and so it's really hard to access childcare. Next slide. And that nearly half of working parents reported experiencing a change in employment or education without childcare assistance, including reduction in work hours or having to quit a job, which really mirrors our Losing Ground report that I spoke about earlier. Next slide. And that 2 in 3 respondents are borrowing money to pay for childcare. They're having to borrow money to pay for childcare. And then over half of the respondents are also having to sacrifice basic household necessities such as food, clothing, utilities, all those types of things to cover childcare again. Next. And so this work, the work I just talked about with the Balancing Act, really mirrors what we know from the United Ways across the state with their ALICE work, that asset limited income constrained employed. And so what we know is that childcare is the single highest expense most families have. It's even higher than keeping a roof over their head. And then because of COVID, we had to pivot our work. And we pivoted very quickly on that fateful day of March 13th of 2020 when the governor ordered that all public schools to close on March 16th. We at the Policy Institute, working with partners across the state, had already started talking about surveying the impact of COVID-19 on childcare providers. Thank goodness we did, because when the governor came out in the afternoon of the 13th, by the next day, we had a draft survey to go out to childcare providers across the state. And really understanding, given the importance of early care and education to the overall economy, we know that it's precariously in a financial state. Childcare operates on very thin margins. And what we also know is that without a robust early care and education sector, Louisiana would continue to struggle to get back to work. And so really to help us understand what it takes to support early care and education providers, we've conducted a series of surveys with childcare providers. In fact, we've conducted now 4 of them. Next slide. Our first survey was March 16th through the 23rd. And so that was, as you all know, very early in the time of COVID. And so we were seeing a majority of providers that were losing revenue. They were having to close. At one point, we had over 70% of providers closed in the state. Closed childcare providers were experiencing financial losses from multiple directions. What childcare is very different than a school, where a public school gets minimum foundation monies. And so if the kids there are not there, I mean, they're going to have income to be able to do what they need to do. Childcare is just like a private school. It's tuition. If you don't pay tuition, they can't cover the cost. So the financial losses were just compounded. What we also know is that 1/3 of the childcares reported that any extended closure would force them to permanently close. This is important to know, that they felt like an extended closure would be 2 weeks. Now, what we know is we have several childcare centers across the state that closed up to 6 months. And so the thought that they couldn't even come back after the first 2 weeks early in the pandemic was rather frightening. And then a majority of the providers at this point, early in the pandemic, were still supporting to pay their employees. They were really trying to do the work that they needed to do. Next slide. And so we came back in April because we thought, surely we're going to be able to wrangle this COVID thing in, but we still need to understand like the longer-term impact of COVID-19 on the childcare sector. And what happened is what we found out is that all providers were losing money. There were a lot of financial losses. 1/3 of providers continued to expect an extended closure to make them close permanently. Almost half of their providers during this time period in April laid off staff and expected to lay off additional staff. And then grants and forgivable loans remain the most requested supports. This is really important because we were able to use our data through these surveys to work with the Louisiana Department of Education when the COVID response dollars started coming into the state. Because what we were hearing from the providers were they needed grants or those forgivable loans. They didn't want at that time, we didn't know much about PPE, and so they were frightened by it. What we also knew is that they needed more protective equipment, they needed cleaning supplies, they just needed a lot of help. And so what we were able to do is work closely with the Department of Ed and say, can you structure grants through these COVID response dollars to get out to the providers? And they were able to do that. And quite frankly, where we're sitting right now as a state is because the Department of Education that we have, we're able to push those federal dollars out to providers to keep them open. Make no mistake, it didn't create more seats for children. It didn't do any of that. But what it did is it helped slow down the hemorrhage of businesses that were losing money. What we also found out during this time period is that more providers had to close temporarily, and closed providers cited low enrollment because of the COVID-19 concerns, and that they still were needing financial support to reopen. And that open providers were remaining open primarily for those essential workers, and that most open providers experienced a loss of a 50% reduction of their enrollment during this time period. Next slide. And so we did a third survey in June. And so the financial losses just kept coming at this point, and they were growing. And then the majority of open providers saw, again, reduced enrollment. They had waiting lists to get into to be able to serve more kids. They were also experiencing, if you were open, you had reduced ratios, so you couldn't serve as many kids as you once did because of mandates that were in place. And additionally, providers were experiencing challenges purchasing and needing cleaning equipment as well as PPE supplies. And then less than 1 in 4 of the open providers really expected to be able to survive the long-term operations with currently smaller ratio size. At this point, we were able to quantify the loss, the economic loss to providers in our state. And so when we closed the survey, the sector from just March to June had lost $137 million just in Louisiana. Childcare is a small business. We need small businesses to be an economically viable state. And so it was just crushing to hear that number of 137 million just from March to June. Next slide. And so we decided to do a fourth survey, and we just closed this survey in January. And so we were able to, preliminary results is to quantify what the loss was of the early care and education provider sector from March 2020 through the end of January 2021. And they have lost $245 million just in our state, even with the availability of federal aid. And so one of the things that comes up frequently and that I get asked all the time is, Libbie, you've had all this federal aid that's come in for childcare. You all should be whole. Childcare is not whole at all. They're still serving less children than they had. They can't create more seats. The federal money that has come into our state, again, has helped slow the hemorrhage. It has not stopped it. Childcare has always operated on razor-thin margins. And so we've been able to really use our data at the Policy Institute to influence policy within the Department of Education, also to educate legislators about the impact of childcare on our society as a state, and then also to really talk about the benefits of childcare, but also let's talk about what's happened because of COVID-19. And I often bring up this fact. Anytime we see any economic unrest, we see that children's development lags. And so we know that from the Great Depression, we know that from the Great Recession of '08, we know that from Katrina, we even know that from the floods of Baton Rouge in 2016, that anytime there's some economic disruption and for families, language declines, development declines, and so it just makes the case for even more investment in early care and education. Next slide. And so I just wanted to show you our impact at the Policy Institute for 2020. We did not stop when COVID came in. We did not stop at all. And so you can see here that our research really helped Louisiana childcare providers impacted by COVID-19 by making sure those federal dollars coming into the state were getting out to them. We also help more children and families access high quality early care and education. You'll see here, again, we were able to maintain funding and not have any cuts during the legislative session of 2020, which quite frankly was a feat in itself and a miracle. We've also worked with the city of New Orleans to help them continue to make investments in young children in their city. But I want to brag right now on your new superintendent in East Baton Rouge Parish, because he's trying to make some bold moves for you all in Baton Rouge, and we're supporting him and how he thinks about creating more access for birth through 3-year-olds in the city of Baton Rouge, especially for your at-risk population. So I will say to you, support him, because he wants to support young children. He wants to support all children, but I've been really impressed with his commitment to young children in the parish of East Baton Rouge. And then we continue to educate policymakers and business people and people like you all, and just say, making the case for early care and education. That's what we've done this week with Louisiana Early Ed Week, where we kicked off with the developmental pediatrician, Jack Shonkoff, who gave a wonderful keynote. And then yesterday we had a day of awareness via social media and had a film screening. And then today we hosted legislators and business leaders throughout the state in a virtual platform. And then tomorrow we'll have a family forum to really hear the voices of what families need for their young children. And then Friday we are co-hosting with Libbie, a business breakfast briefing for business people related to the economic impact of early care and education by Federal Reserve economist Rob Gruenwald, to really make the case of, like, this isn't just an issue for Louisiana. This is an issue for every state. This is an issue for our country. And that when we don't invest in children, we're not investing in families. And that has a long-term economic impact. Next slide. And so I would be remiss if I didn't mention that how we are able to do this work. And I will tell you, we are a staff of full-time of 3. We outshoot our coverage every day, but the reason we're able to do that is when you have partners like Susan Nelson at the Louisiana Partnership for Children and Family, and then others like you'll see on this slide of a coalition called Ready Louisiana, where we really are about investing in early care and education. And by doing this work in coalition, we're able to move mountains for young children. And so I'm just really proud that we have this coalition, that we have partners. Many of you know many of the people on here. It is bipartisan, it is business and industry, it is nonprofits, it is child care centers, but the coalition is broad and deep. BRAC is part of the coalition. And so we're just really proud that we're able to do this kind of work together, working with partners that are committed to young children in our state. Next slide. And here's my contact information. If you have any questions or you ever need anything, please reach out to us. We are very narrow and deep in what we focus on at the Louisiana Policy Institute for Children. We really stay in our lane of children birth to 4 and making sure that they can be successful in school and in life. And through the work that we're able to do, we're able to primarily early care and education, but we also work very closely with the health in the health sector as well. And again, you know, Susan gave me all these accolades, but let me tell you, there's nobody better than Susan Nelson. And so, you know, when you have partners like that, you can do really cool things for young children and for families. And so we're just really committed to doing that work. And again, working with all of you. And thank you for listening to me, and thank you for having me. And if anybody has any questions, I'm more than happy to answer them. So
I have a question. As Rotarians, specifically, what would be your call to action for us to how we can get involved and help?
Sure. I think the call to action would be is if you have businesses or you're part of communities that would want to be a part of the Ready Louisiana Coalition to say we want to increase investment in early care and education, that would be helpful. The other piece that you can do is call your elected officials. They don't know how you feel about something unless you tell them. And so, you know, one of the things that's happening right now is sports betting got passed in November by the people. 55 out of 64 parishes said we can do sports betting in Louisiana. All the rules for that have to be made. When they brought it to us as the people, the legislature brought it to us, they said, oh, we're going to make sure revenue goes towards early childhood. We have to make sure that the revenue from sports betting goes to early childhood. So I would say call your legislators and let them know that that's important to you. Let them know that you want to increase investments in young children, because that helps families get back to work and back to school to create a strong economy for our state.
We have had several comments, very positive. Margaret King said, thanks for the presentation, very important information. Mel Robertson, very informative. Jill Rigby Garner, outstanding presentation. You know, pleased to hear Dr. Narcisse's comments in EBR. So you've got some fans out here who are really interested in the things you've had to say.
Well, I will say y'all need to support your new superintendent. He is very clear. He can't do this work alone, and he wants buy-in from the community, and he's listening. And I've watched him in some interesting conversations, but what he's about is children. And I think we can all get behind that.
I think you're right. Very excited about him as well, and look forward to the point where we invite him and get him to come speak to our club as well.
I think you would love it. I'll put a plug in for you.
Great. Thank you very much. Thanks again for your presentation today, Libbie.
Thank you.
And so that's our meeting for today. Thank you again for everyone who's participated. Once again, please mask up, stay safe, and we'll see you next week. Our speaker will be Alyssa Carson, she will be speaking about the Mars generation, because I think she really wants to go to Mars. So we'll see you next week.